Let's go back to 1993 and talk about what kind of mark the Jaguar had when it landed. First, imagine the gaming landscape at the time. Star Fox was out and wowed the world with its flat-shaded arcade action. Everyone loved it, and it's a decent game still to this day. Platformers were huge, sports games and Mortal Kombat was selling like crazy, and there were rumblings of next-generation consoles just on the horizon. One of them was the Atari Jaguar, promising CD-quality sound on a cartridge, high-quality graphics, and advanced technical tricks like garage shading, which would normally cost you a lot of money to enjoy. Let me give you some context on how difficult it was to enjoy something like garage shading in a game at the time. Origin's Strike Commando also came out in 1993 and required a minimum of a 386, 4 megabytes of RAM, and a sound device like an Adlib, Roland, or Sound Blaster Pro to output decent music. I looked up computer prices from 1993 for this video, already knowing in advance how expensive they were. And here are a couple examples of how much you'd have to pay simply to come close to the minimum requirements of a game like this at the time. Option 1 is a $1,000 386SX, but it's only got 2 megabytes of RAM. Option 2 is £500, or 868 pounds in today's money, which is $1,064 US. These computers still do not meet the minimum requirements even at these prices, and option 2 doesn't even include a color monitor. It's always been expensive to be on the bleeding edge, and with graphics technology like garage shading becoming an easy way to add depth and dimension to games, and with the Jaguar retailing at $249.99 at launch, offering this and more, this is really quite mind-boggling. $249.99 translates to about $500 in today's money, and considering the alternative if you wanted to be playing games using the latest graphics technology, I know what I would pick. It's hard to really explain what this was like back in 1993, but imagine it being similar to when the Xbox Series X came out and Microsoft was talking about it being capable of ray tracing. Suddenly, reflections and ambient lighting looks way more realistic because of this. This was true of a console being capable of garage shading at the time, where once flat textures and landscapes suddenly have shape and texture to them, and look far more real. The fact is, it was nothing like this game when it came out, or the Atari Jaguar for that matter, and we're about to go into more detail as to why it was bundled with the console for a day one launch. To clarify, I am reviewing the 1993 original release, as the game was reissued in 1994 on a 1 megabyte cartridge. This meant the menu music, voice samples, and even the small animation at the beginning of the game was cut. Thanks Atari, that sucks, but really you should have owned the better version by then. You're a resistance fighter, pushing back against the Pernitia Empire in the Transmogriffin, or T-Griffin fighter. The idea is your weapon pods have been stolen, and you need to get them back across 5 sectors worth of planets while collecting power-ups for your ship, finding bonus stages, and ultimately trying not to die. The gameplay is really where Cybermorph shines for me, as there was literally nothing else like it at the time. It's ostensibly a go-anywhere planet exploration game where the idea is you're tasked with following your radar to find the pods scattered around the various planets you visit. The only restriction is on the boundaries of the levels, which will differ and generally take the form of mountains that are just too high to traverse. Some levels require you to navigate canyons and gates to teleport around, and others require you to find generators which turn off shields holding your pods hostage. The combat is really solid, with several different weapons like detonators to destroy several buildings at one time, and a 3-way shot. Additionally, I mentioned hidden bonus levels before, and if you figure out how to find it, You can key in the code at the sector screen and fill up on extra ships and weaponry. At first glance, there's a certain lax structure to the gameplay, but you get into the rhythm of scouting, finding pods, carefully approaching packs of enemies, and strategically taking them out using whatever means you have available to you. There is a depth to Cybermorph that goes beyond simply flying in a straight line and shooting things. If you blunder into enemies, you'll get torn apart. You have to carefully plan your approaches to pods in the later sectors, and it's really satisfying when you get the last one. In terms of graphics, well, there's more good than there is bad. This is a launch game on brand new hardware at a time where 3D graphics of this kind of sophistication were in their infancy, so there weren't a lot of templates to copy from. And to make matters more challenging for attention to detail, they also took on the challenge of you having full control over where you go and how you see it. The Gurad shading does a nice job of mimicking depth, and although the frame rate does drop every now and then, and the polygonal models are a little simple, the game has a really distinct style to it. What about the sound? I want to touch on the Skylar quotes. If you don't fly like a dope and repeatedly slam yourself into the landscape, which is easily avoidable if you try to play with any sort of skill and contemplation, you'll barely hear her. So if you hear someone complaining about the frequency of her asking you where you learned to fly, then they suck at Cybermorph confirmed. There is also no in-game music, but there's something about the desolate planets and the steady roar of the T-Griffin engine that adds atmosphere for me. There isn't a lot more to talk about with Cybermorph. It really is a disgustingly underrated and bizarrely maligned game. I love how strategic the gameplay is for the time it was released. The free-for-all nature of the levels was innovative, and the combat is fun, and the fact that you can choose the order in which you play the levels adds another layer of choice for the player. I really like the way it looks, and although there's no in-game music, the atmosphere of your T-Griffin engine on the desolate planets is really cool. Look, if you don't like Cybermorph, that's cool. Not all games are going to appeal to all people, but just because you don't like the style it's going for, doesn't mean it's a bad game. The Gurad shading does a nice job of mimicking depth, and although the frame rate does... The Gurad shading does make a